When I was growing up as a kid in school, math was my favorite subject. Anyone else? Math? A few people here. The numbers were easy to relate to, the operations were practical, and everything was just so logical. I think one of the things I loved most about math was there was always a single, indisputable right answer. Nothing was open to interpretation, like reading or writing essays. If I got the wrong answer, there was no reason to argue with the teacher. That's as pointless as arguing with math. But math is rational. And that's why one of the most tragic days in my childhood was the day I learned about negative numbers. What? How can you have -5 apples? What do you mean the square root of 9 is no longer 3, but also -3? And don't get me started on imaginary numbers. They don't even exist. But looking back, that was a break in my reality that was an absolutely necessary one. Because, as we'll be exploring today, the world does not fit into neat, logical buckets. Before I go further, let me take a minute to refresh everyone on the difference between discrete and continuous data. When something is discrete, it is described in a finite number of values. For example, how many dogs do you have? When something is continuous, it can take any value along an interval. For example, the temperature today could be 75.926 degrees. An extreme example of a discrete system is the binary number system, in which something can take only two values, 0 or 1, true or false, on or off. And that's actually the basis for how computers work. Every action that a computer takes has been decided by running instructions through a ton of transistors. And transistors, at their fundamental level, work in absolute binary. They either restrict or allow current to go, off or on. I know that can be tricky to understand. For example, how can it be that a video that my computer plays be represented in just zeros and ones? Well, let's break down that video. A video is essentially just a collection of photographs, one presented one after the other. How do we break up that photo? That photo is just a collection of pixel colors placed in the right spot. How do we break up that color? That color can be created by just mixing a few fundamental colors together, each of which can be represented by how much of that color. For example, 60% red, 40% green. 60% is just a number in the base 10 decimal system, and all it takes to convert a number from base 10 to base 2, which is binary, is just little math. So, underneath that visually striking cat video is just a sequence of zeros and ones. Fascinating, right? Matt's laugh could also be represented in a sequence of zeros and ones. My love for math eventually led to a love for computers and resulted in me getting a degree in computer science. Most of the computer science curriculum is programming languages, essentially how to speak to a computer. And after you do that for a long time, your brain starts to get wired like a computer, where everything is a binary decision. Am I hungry? Yes. Did I have breakfast? Yes. Should I eat more? No. But you can see how I can potentially get myself into trouble thinking that way. For when you're limiting all your actions based on black or white decisions, you miss out on a vast collection of gray areas. I started to see things in absolute terms. Today is a great day or a terrible day. That person is my best friend or my enemy. I'm proud of myself or I am extremely embarrassed. However, I know I'm not the only one who has thought in extremes before. During a period of religious exploration, Siddhartha Gautama, who later became known as the Buddha, abandoned his fancy lifestyle in search of spiritual enlightenment. He initially pursued extreme sacrifice by abstaining from all self-indulgence. At this time, statues depicted him with his ribs showing from eating just a few grains of rice a day. Ultimately, the Buddha realized that both indulgence and deprivation were equally useless, even detrimental to his goal of achieving awakening. And he came up with one of the core teachings of Buddhism, known as the Middle Way, which embraces the center path as the most balanced and effective approach to life. Another example comes from our solar system. For in the 1500s, the leading theory of planetary alignment put the Earth at the center of our solar system. Everything revolved around the Earth. Then along came Copernicus, who stated that the sun was at the center. And what followed was a big debate about what revolved around what. Was it the sun? Was it the Earth at the center? A or B? 0 or 1? Now most of us will say, of course, the Earth revolves around the sun. But I'm actually going to rattle your reality today and tell you that you're wrong. For if NASA based its calculations off that, we would have satellites crashing into each other. The real answer is that there is so much mass in our solar system, if you include all the other planets, think about how big Jupiter and Saturn are, that everything in our solar system revolves around each other. There's a center of gravity of our solar system. It's called the barycenter. And believe it or not, the sun actually wobbles around that barycenter. And this can change position based on the alignment of our planets. Sometimes the barycenter is near the center of the sun, sometimes it's outside the surface. So in reality, we don't necessarily revolve around the sun. We revolve around something a little different than that. But my point here is that if we're to constrain ourselves to choosing between just two answers, we may not have made it to the moon. For when we're limited in our choices, we often overlook the reality of the situation. Can anyone think of any other concepts that we often force ourselves into just two buckets? Go ahead, shout them out. You got one in mind, Randall? I'll repeat them for those online. Gender. It's a great one. Politics. Love it. Democrat, Republican. What else?
White versus non-white.
Yes. Gender is a huge one. Male or female. I recently came across a quote from Dr. Rebecca Helm, a biology professor at the University of North Carolina, a friend to the LGBTQIA community. Let me pause for a second. The LGBTQIA community. Lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, asexual. That's 7 additional categories compared to the standard male or female. Here's what she has to say. I see a lot of people talking about biological sexes of genders right now. Lots of folks make biological sex seem really simple. Well, since it's so simple, let's find the biological roots. Now I'm going to spare you about 5 minutes of biology jargon where she starts with a simple XX and XY chromosome and leads us through all the various situations that can occur as your body develops and all the permutations it can lead to. But eventually she concludes with, it means you may be genetically male or female, chromosomally male or female, hormonally male, female, or non-binary, with cells that may or may not hear the male, female, or non-binary call, and all this leading to a body that can be male, non-binary, or female. No wonder it is so hard to fit everyone into a simple male or female gender. Thankfully, some really smart people have come together and developed a framework known as the gender unicorn, where everything is viewed on a spectrum. And as you'll see on your screen in just a second, there's only one discrete value up there. Everything else is a spectrum from one to the other. Thank you, Spencer. Now, this concept of a spectrum is super important, and it reminded me of when I went through Starting Point here with Reverend Nika a few years ago. In one of our meetings, we did an exercise where she made statements such as, I believe in God, and I believe people are inherently good. And we were supposed to express whether we agree or disagree with those. You should have seen the frozen faces among all of us as we were thinking, how am I supposed to make a decision like that right now? But then she explained that on one side of the room was the extreme I agree, and the other side I disagree, and that we were allowed to place ourselves along that line in order to represent what we believed. Instantly, by being able to answer on a spectrum, we unfroze and found our spots along that line. I have a neighbor who at the time of the last election flew a Trump flag high and proud. And if you don't know me, that doesn't typically align with my political views. And internally, I admit that I labeled them as MAGA Republicans, and I vowed to avoid them because I was sure any encounter with them would result in conflict. So when my daughter was selling Girl Scout cookies a few months ago, I had planned to skip their house. Not surprisingly, Scarlett, in her cookie-selling eagerness, had jumped a house ahead of me and was already on their front porch. Preparing for a possibly awkward situation, I was stunned when they placed one of the largest orders on our block and then proceeded to throw some extra cash as a donation to the troop. How could it be that these Trump supporters were actually very generous people? Could it be that I mislabeled them? Or perhaps my mistake was in labeling them in the first place. The point I'm trying to make here is that although life is full of discrete categories and binary decisions, we can lose out when we allow ourselves to be restricted by those buckets, especially with people. I've talked about gender, religion, politics. Some other things we commonly group into buckets: race. Is race a discrete attribute, or perhaps a sliding scale? Illnesses or addictions. Does someone become sick overnight, or is their sickness a spectrum? And regardless, should that even define them? Feelings. Are you happy or sad? Or is it possible you can be both at the same time? The smaller the number of buckets we classify things into, the more detail is lost. Remember back to my earlier explanation of computers and binary code. I'd like to show you a quick 1-minute video about the difference between how many bits, which is the number of zeros and ones, can be used to represent a picture and some music. In this video, you'll see it go from 1 bit, which is just black and white, 2 values, into 64 bits, which can represent 281 trillion colors. It's supposed to sound like that. Anyone recognize what game that was from? No Among Us players? There we go, I heard it over there. Yes. So how basic did that imposter look with just 1 bit? And how much more beauty did we gain with each set of more bits? Not just in the image, but in the music too. That first set of music was not pleasing to listen to. In fact, Randall thought something was wrong with our speakers when we were rehearsing earlier today. The problem with binary thinking is its inaccuracy. Gray areas do exist and are prominent in every issue. It may make us feel better to think about this or that, them or us, him or her, but that's not how the world works. When we're engaging in binary thinking, we're stuck making assumptions. And being stuck in categorical thought doesn't actually involve much thinking at all. You just assume without thinking that new experiences will fit into your old boxes, buckets, labels, generalizations, and stereotypes. Binary thinking also leads to conflict and detachment. When we make assumptions about others by lumping them into preconceived categories, we aren't being curious about them, and we're not trying to investigate the nuances that may bring us closer together. Why bother getting to know someone when you already have a clear picture of who they are? It's a dangerous road because it leads people to making racist remarks or shallow connections with other people. So, how can we stop thinking in a binary way? Clay Drinko, an educator and proponent of full spectrum thinking, proposes 7 things we can do to break free from the limitations of binary thinking and embrace an open-minded approach to life. Number 1, try new things. Engage in new experiences to encounter new ideas and perspectives. That trains your brain to think outside the box. Meet new people. Expand your social circle to include individuals from diverse backgrounds and cultures, and be open to their perspectives. Cultivate curiosity. Ask questions and approach interactions with genuine curiosity, focusing on learning about others instead of talking about yourself. Number 4, listen with an open mind. Slow down your reactions, avoid jumping to conclusions, and keep your mind open to new information, even if it challenges your preconceptions. Build empathy. Acknowledge the truth in others' experiences and be open to multiple perspectives, fostering empathy and understanding. Number 6, don't fall for the Dunning-Kruger effect, which explains that we have the tendency to overestimate our expertise in a topic on limited knowledge. Stay humble and continue learning to avoid assumptions and generalizations. And lastly, embrace uncertainty. Accept the complexity of the world and recognize that you may not know as much as you think. Embracing uncertainty promotes intellectual growth and open-mindedness. It's also worth noting that as you use, we're called to escape binary thinking as part of our principles. Our second principle, which focuses on justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. And our third, acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations. If more people prime themselves for full spectrum thinking, perhaps we wouldn't live in such a disconnected and divisive world, because more people would be engaged with each other's diverse perspectives instead of lumping each other into preconceived categories. Now, I know I'm probably one of the nerdiest ones in this sanctuary, and if we had a spectrum line from cool to nerd, I would be out the door into the other building. So perhaps most of you don't fall into binary thinking as much as I do, and that's great. But as you leave here today, I ask you to try and take notice of any categories you catch yourself using, especially with people. And then reflect on if you're seeing the whole person when you place them into those buckets, or if there's a spectrum that you might want to consider instead. When I was preparing for this service a few weeks ago, my other daughter asked me what I was doing. And I told her, I'm writing a talk on how life is a balancing act, and that you should never have none of something or too much of something. It's best to consider a balance. She paused, a little confused, and then looked at me and said, but what about hugs? Can you ever have too many hugs? No, my sweet dear, you are right. You can never have too many hugs. But with everything else, I challenge you to resist the norm of binary thinking. For we are not computers. We are people. We are spiritually courageous people who transform the world through justice and compassion.